alarm hit before I even sat down. A deep red pulse rolled across the control deck of Velku Station, and every alien engineer in the room froze at the same second, like the sound had reached into their spines and stopped them cold. I was the only one still moving, because I was the only one who understood what that alarm actually meant. My name is Daniel Carter, and 6 months ago I was a scholarship student sitting in an alien classroom, solving a homework question nobody expected me to solve. Now I was standing on a dying planet's last orbital platform, watching the numbers on my own design spike toward failure in real time, and I had less than 4 minutes to stop it. Let me back up, fast, because there is no time to waste on this station, and there is no time to waste in this story either. Velku Prime was a planet losing its magnetic shield. Slowly, for 200 years, its atmosphere had been leaking into space, and nobody in the coalition of worlds had found a way to stop it. When I was a student in Professor Ilfvey's class, she gave us a question that was built to be unsolvable, a problem so old it had become a tradition, a way to teach students how to fail with style. I did not fail with style. I gave her an actual working plan, built from 4 old mining platforms already floating above the planet, retrofitted into one synchronized magnetic driver. It was not elegant. It was a patch, not a cure, but it worked on paper, and paper became a proposal. And a proposal became a project, and somehow, 6 months later, that project became me, standing on Platform 4, watching my own numbers try to kill an entire planet. The alarm kept pulsing. Around me, 3 alien engineers were shouting into their comm collars, and their voices came out through my translator earpiece half a second behind their mouths, which made everything sound like a bad echo of panic. An engineer named Tess Core grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. She was Farron, like my old professor, with the same gray skin and the same nervous energy that showed up as a faint tremor along her jaw. "Daniel," she said, "the core is overheating. The resonance pulse is not syncing. If it does not sync in the next few minutes, the coils will tear each other apart, and the shockwave will hit the lower atmosphere." I already knew that. I had built the model. I knew exactly what would happen if 4 ancient mining platforms, each spinning in a different orbit, tried to fire a synchronized magnetic pulse and missed each other by even half a second. The stress would not stay in space. It would punch straight down into the collapsing magnetosphere below us, and instead of patching the hole, we would rip it wider. I looked at the main display. 4 platforms, 4 countdown timers, 4 numbers that were supposed to match and did not. Platform 1 was locked. Platform 2 was locked. Platform 3 was drifting out of its window by nearly 2 full seconds, which does not sound like much until you remember these were ancient mining coils never designed to fire in unison, coils I had convinced an entire planetary council to trust with their last chance at survival. 2 seconds, said an engineer named Callum Pierce, an off-world contractor from Earth who had been assigned to the retrofit crew because someone in the coalition decided a human engineer should supervise a human design. 2 seconds is nothing on paper and everything in real life. I did not answer him yet. I was already moving toward the console because standing still and explaining the danger to people who already understood the danger was a waste of the only resource I actually had left, which was time. The plan had always depended on a trigger pulse fired from the station core, something to force all 4 platforms into rhythm even though their orbits refused to agree. That trigger pulse was supposed to fire automatically. It had not fired. Somewhere in the old code buried inside Platform 3, a decision routine built 2 centuries ago for mining schedules, not magnetic defense, was quietly refusing to hand over control, because it did not recognize the new pulse as a valid command. I pulled up the code on my own tablet, hands steadier than I expected, because panic is useless, and I had learned that lesson long before I ever left Earth. My father used to say that machines do not care how scared you are. They only care whether you understand them, and right now understanding was the only weapon I had. The station core AI, a calm, synthetic voice that coalition engineers called Vessel, spoke through the room's speakers. "Warning. Platform 3 has entered an unrecognized command state. Manual override required within 180 seconds. Tess Core looked at me with wide, dark eyes. "Can you fix code from 200 years ago in 3 minutes? I did not know. I genuinely did not know. But there was no version of this moment where I stood still and hoped someone else knew either, so I said yes. Because saying yes was the only way to make it true. I opened the old command structure, and it was worse than I expected, layered in a mining language that had not been actively used in over a century, full of shorthand abbreviations that made sense only to engineers who had died decades before I was born. Callum leaned over my shoulder, fast, sharp, already scanning lines faster than I could read them out loud. "There," he said, pointing at a single line buried under 6 older ones. "It thinks the new signal is a maintenance request, not an emergency command. It is waiting for authorization from a supervisor role that does not exist anymore. That was the answer. Not a flaw in my design. A flaw in machinery so old it had never been taught to recognize an emergency that important. Because 200 years ago, nobody imagined this platform would ever matter again. 120 seconds, said Vessel. I did not have time to write new code. I did not have time to explain a new authorization protocol to a system built before space travel between these two worlds was common. What I had was a shortcut, the same kind of shortcut that got me into this mess in the first place. The same instinct that said do not fix the whole problem, just convince the existing system to do what you need. I forged the supervisor role. Not with new code, but by feeding Platform 3 a maintenance override signal shaped exactly like the ones its own dead engineers used to send a century ago, borrowed from an old archived log Callum had pulled up seconds earlier by pure luck. I copied the format, changed the authorization key, and sent it as if a supervisor from 200 years ago had personally approved this exact emergency. The screen flickered. For one long, terrible second, nothing happened, and Thescor made a sound I will never forget. Something between a gasp and a prayer in a language I did not understand. Then the Platform 3 timer jumped and synced, locking into the same rhythm as Platform 1 and Platform 2. 60 seconds, said Vessel, and now there was something almost like relief in its calm, synthetic voice. If a machine can have relief at all. We were not finished. Platform 4's numbers were still climbing, heat spiking past every safety threshold I had built into the model. This was the platform closest to the planet, the one carrying the largest share of the driver load, and if it failed now, after everything else had synced, the damage would be worse, not better. Because 3 working platforms firing against one that shattered would send a shockwave straight into Velku Prime's upper atmosphere. Daniel, said Callum, his voice tight, the coolant lines on 4 are original parts. They were never rated for this kind of continuous output. I remembered that detail from my original design. One small paragraph buried on page 2 of a report I wrote as a student who never expected anyone to actually build the thing. I had written that the coolant system on the oldest platform would need reinforcement before long-term use, and someone, somewhere, in the rush to build this project in record time, had skipped that reinforcement to meet a deadline that suddenly felt very foolish. 30 seconds, said Vessel. There was no time to reinforce anything physically. There was only time to reduce the load, and reducing the load meant pulling power away from Platform 4 and pushing it onto the other 3, which were already running at their own limits. I am not going to pretend I was calm in that final stretch. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the station's air recycling system. But somewhere underneath the fear, there was a steady, stubborn part of me that refused to accept the word impossible. The same part of me that answered a homework question everyone else had agreed not to answer. I rerouted 12% of Platform 4's projected output to the other 3 coils, accepting a small risk of desync in exchange for cutting the heat spike before it became a rupture. 12% was not a number I calculated with a clean formula. It was an instinct built from months of studying this exact system, a bet placed by someone who understood the machine well enough to guess what it could survive. 15 seconds, said Vessel. Thescor grabbed the edge of the console, knuckles pale under her gray skin. Callum stood so still I could hear his breathing over the alarm. Southern time. 10 seconds. The heat curve on Platform 4 bent downward, slow at first, then faster, dropping just below the threshold that would have caused a coolant rupture. 5 seconds. All 4 timers locked into the same rhythm, glowing steady and green instead of flashing red, and for the first time since the alarm began, the room went quiet, except for the low mechanical hum of 4 ancient mining platforms working together the way nothing had ever asked them to work before. Synchronization achieved, said Vessel. Magnetic driver array stable. Nobody cheered. Nobody moved for almost 10 full seconds. Because after that much fear, silence feels safer than celebration. As if joy too early might jinx the numbers back into danger. Then Thescor let out a breath so long it sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for the entire 6 minutes, and she looked at me with an expression I did not expect from a Farron engineer who had spent weeks treating my design with polite, careful skepticism. You saved the platform, she said. You saved the surface. I did not save anything alone. Callum had found that hidden line of ancient code in seconds, faster than I ever could have on my own, and Thess had kept every backup system ready, in case my patchwork forgery failed. This had never been a one-person job, not in the classroom, and not here, on a station built by generations of engineers I never met. But there was something else happening in that room, something bigger than one crisis being solved. I watched Thescor look at the stable numbers on the screen, and I saw the same expression I had seen once before, back in a small office when a very old alien counselor asked me how long a fix like this would take to build. That expression was not relief. It was disbelief, the kind that comes from watching an old, tired hope suddenly become real. Vessel's calm voice returned, quieter this time. Magnetospheric patch confirmed. Initial stability projection extended to 240 years. 240 years, not forever. Not a perfect solution, but 240 years was enough time for a planet's engineers to build something better. Enough time for children not yet born to grow up under a sky that would not slowly bleed away above them. I sat down on the cold floor of Platform 4, not because I needed to sit, but because my legs finally admitted how frightened they had been the entire time my mind was busy solving the problem. Callum sat down next to me, quiet, staring at the same stable numbers like he still did not fully believe them. "You knew that supervisor override trick would work," he said. "How?" "I did not know it would work," I told him. "I only knew it was our best chance, and our best chance was better than doing nothing while the timer ran out." He laughed, short and tired, the kind of laugh that only comes after real danger has passed. "That is either the bravest thing I have ever heard an engineer say, or the most reckless." "Maybe it is both," I said, and for the first time in 6 minutes, I actually meant to smile instead of just holding my face steady out of habit. Word of what happened on Platform 4 spread fast through the Coalition Science Network, faster than any of us expected. Within a day, other engineers were studying the recording of Vessel's countdown, studying the forged authorization signal, arguing about whether it was brilliant improvisation or dangerous risk-taking. Professor Ilthvay sent me a short message through the university's old network, the first message she had sent me since I left her classroom. "You were supposed to demonstrate a beautiful failure," she wrote. "Instead, you demonstrated an ugly success. I am still deciding which lesson taught the class more." I read that message twice, standing in the observation deck of Velku Station, looking down at a planet that was, for the first time in 2 centuries, no longer losing its sky quite so quickly. The old Slith counselor, the one who had asked me how long a fix would take, sent no message at all. She came in person instead, slow and steady, moving across the deck with the same quiet patience she had shown the very first time we met. She stood beside me at the window, her 4 eyes fixed on the planet below. The 4th eye that never blinked, staring straight down at the surface like it refused to look away even for a second. 240 years, she said finally, her translated voice slow and dry as ever. "My grandmother spent her whole life arguing about a perfect solution that never came. My grandchildren will live long enough to argue about your imperfect one." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, and for a long moment neither of us needed to speak at all. Later that night, back in the small crew quarters assigned to the human engineers on the station, Callum asked me something that stuck with me longer than the crisis itself. "Are you always like this?" he said. "Do you always just decide impossible things are actually possible, and then somehow make that true?" I told him the truth. The same truth I gave Professor Ilthvay months earlier in her office, back when this whole strange chain of events began with one homework question nobody expected me to answer. "I am bad at knowing when to give up," I said. "Back home, we do not really believe in impossible. We believe in problems that have not met their deadline yet." He shook his head, smiling despite how tired he looked. "That is either the most human thing I have ever heard, or the most dangerous." "Maybe both," I said again. And this time neither of us laughed, because we both understood how close both possibilities had come to being true, only hours earlier, on a platform that almost tore itself apart trying to save a planet nobody thought could be saved. Velku Prime is still not fixed, not completely, not the way Professor Ilthvay's textbook once demanded a perfect answer should look. The magnetosphere still leaks, just slower now, buying time instead of buying certainty. Somewhere on that planet's surface, new engineers, alien engineers, are already designing the next fix, the one that might finally hold forever instead of just for 240 years. I like to think my old professor was right about one thing, even if she never meant it as a compliment. I did not solve an unsolvable problem. I only refused to accept that unsolvable was the end of the conversation. Somewhere between a nervous student turning in an exam nobody expected to matter, and an exhausted engineer forging 200-year-old authorization codes with 6 seconds left on the clock, there was one simple idea holding everything together the entire time. Impossible is just homework that has not been finished yet. And I have never been very good at leaving homework unfinished.